Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the closing press briefing of the Conference of Ministers, which just ended a moment ago. And we are pleased to be joined by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, and Dr. Carlos Lopez, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, and Ms. Habiba Majri Sheikh, Director of Information and Communications at the AEUC, for this closing ceremony. Now, in keeping with tradition, we will give the floor to our dignitaries to make a few remarks, and then we will open up the floor to questions. So, without much ado, let me invite Dr. Dlamini Zuma to give some remarks. Okay, Dr. Carlos Lopez will start. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. This was a week of many events, and I think everybody will agree it was quite substantive. The diversity of the themes covered was quite large, and it is testimony of the fact that this Conference of Ministers and technical committee, subcommittee of the AU has become really a place to come to debate about policy making in the continent, in the economic and integration areas. And on this occasion, we are particularly pleased with the fact that we could count on a very large presence of ministers and governors, over 60, about 2,000 participants, and also the fact that we had 25 side events, including one with the former heads of state of Africa, the Africa Forum. We were also very pleased to see that there was quite an interesting participation, both in substance and in numbers, of civil society organizations, academia, private sector. We had discussed many themes, but the most salient ones obviously relate to the themes of the conference, and there were three basic tenets on the themes of the conference. How can we mobilize people for Agenda 2063? How can we better plan Agenda 2063? And how can we better finance Agenda 2063? And on the financing side, as you are aware, there was an obvious link with the preparations for the Financing for Development Conference that is going to take place in Addis in July. So this was an opportunity for Africans to have a firmed up position on how they will negotiate the defense of what is no less than the common African position for post-2015 that was already adopted since last year, and has allowed for Africa to have a common voice in most of the negotiations relating to this issue, and now complemented with more detail on how Africans see the negotiations on financing for development. So those were the salient points. We were very pleased with the level of participation, with the coverage, and the large number of themes that allow people to debate, from statistics to regional integration, to Ebola, to social indicators, to issues relating to financing in different forms, including for sustainable development. And of course, also many debates about how we can govern the Agenda 2063 process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. Now I hand the microphone over to Dr. Zuma, please.
Thank you very much. I think I echo the words of my brother here, Carlos, that we consider this meeting, which is the first one of jointly Ministers of Integration, Finance and Monetary and Planning, a resounding success. But it's not only the ministers and governors, but all the other people who participated in the various side events, including some of the very important issues for Africa, like urbanization, because we know that in the next coming 20, 30, 40 years, more people will be going into the urban areas, and lots of discussions around those issues of how to manage urbanization, how to make sure that it's done in a way that improves the lives of our people. And of course, the issues like industrialization, which are issues that will transform our economy and will transform Africa. So I think it's been a success. Issues around women, this being the year of women, what are the areas that we want to make sure that in the first 10 years of Agenda 2063 are implemented and achieved for women. So we think this was really a great meeting. And of course, the former heads of state, the Africa Forum, also met, and they brought their collective wisdom and experience to bear on many issues. So, of course, we also honored one of the finest sons of this soil, Adedeji, the former Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of ECA, with the inaugural lecture that was also given by another fine son of the soil, Donald Kaberuka. So all in all, I think this was a really interesting and a very successful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zuma. Well, we now open the floor to questions. Please identify your media, and if possible, stick to one question, please. Thank you. Yes, please.
Bonjour, mon nom est Adam Awad, je suis directeur de publication de Financial Afrique. Tout d'abord, je voudrais remercier les organisateurs pour cet événement qui constitue stablement la première réunion économique africaine, là où la stratégie sur l'Afrique se décide. J'ai deux petites questions. Premièrement, c'est en ce qui concerne les banques centrales. Au terme des résolutions que nous avons eues sur les réunions des banques centrales, on a eu l'impression que leur engagement par rapport à la mobilisation de l'épargne intérieure via aussi les réserves extérieures de l'Afrique ne sont pas très franches. Alors on voudrait savoir, est-ce que les banques centrales croient à cette mobilisation de l'épargne africaine? La deuxième question est relative à l'Union africaine. Est-ce que vous pensez que l'agenda 2063 sera transformé, implémenté sous forme de plan national et intégré aux objectifs des pays africains et aussi des régions économiques aussi africaines? Merci.
Good. Thank you. Well, we'll ask Dr. Lopez to answer that.
Oui, en ce qui concerne la position des banques centrales, bon, je pense qu'on a eu une évolution significative du débat autour des questions de développement. Les banques traditionnellement sont conservatrices parce que c'est leur rôle de pouvoir maintenir le cadre monétaire sous contrôle et pouvoir éventuellement contrôler l'inflation et assurer que les prix sont stables. Mais on a réussi dans la première réunion des gouverneurs de banque centrale à Abuja l'année dernière à avoir une évolution où les banques centrales maintenant se considèrent aussi par intégrer des discussions sur la transformation du continent. c'est dans leur résolution et ça a été réitéré dans cette réunion. Maintenant, on est en train d'évoluer vers une discussion sur les caractéristiques de cet engagement. Et il peut se faire de différentes façons. Une façon, bien sûr, c'est de participer au débat sur l'épargne nationale. Et là, il y a plusieurs points d'entrée. Et nous pensons qu'on a eu encore une fois une évolution par rapport au débat, puisque les banques centrales maintenant se disent prêtes à participer à la mobilisation des ressources internes. Mais vous savez, avec les banques centrales, il faut leur donner un peu de temps pour pouvoir coordonner leur politique par rapport à d'autres impératifs monétaires. Et je pense que les acquis de la réunion d'Abuja étaient déjà assez consistants. Et maintenant, on a évolué encore d'un pas par rapport au besoin d'avoir nos banques centrales beaucoup plus engagées dans non seulement la mobilisation de l'épargne interne, mais plus important, de pouvoir mieux gérer cette épargne interne. Parce que nous savons, par exemple, avec les réserves de banque centrale, si c'est géré d'une façon différente, ça peut ouvrir beaucoup de portes à l'investissement productif. Pour ce qui est de la deuxième question, sans vouloir voler le rôle de Mme Zouma, je peux dire que vous avez suivi que dans la discussion, il y a eu beaucoup de traitement de la question de la domestication, comme on l'a dit, des plans nationaux pour les adapter au ciblage nécessaire pour l'agenda 2063. C'est un processus complexe et même dans la résolution qui a été adoptée par les États membres, ils admettent que c'est un processus complexe, mais ils ont demandé que ce processus commence tout de suite. Donc je pense que ça va prendre quelques années jusqu'à ce qu'on ait satisfaction totale sur la synchronisation entre plans nationaux, plans sous-régionaux et le plan continental. Mais le processus est bien engagé et il vient de commencer.
Yes. 1 second, please. Madam Zuma is going to respond.
No, I agree with what Carlos has said, but I also want to remind you that the Agenda 2063 is also not just a government plan. It's a plan that every citizen can implement. And if you look at its priorities, it involves almost every sector of our human endeavor. So everyone has a role to play in Agenda 2063. Yes, governments have a big role, but everyone has a role too. So, and that's why it was also evolved in the way it did. The first draft came from citizens rather than from governments. Their aspirations and the way they, and Agenda 2063 is about every one of us asking ourselves, what are we doing? And in what we do, we focus our attention to achieving shared prosperity, peace. So it's a collective effort, not just governments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Yes, please.
Dr. Lopez, it's like from the resolution, it looks like the modalities have just now been laid on the table. When do we expect a concrete model of financing the Agenda 2063? And what can you say is the take-home for the minister, as in what modalities do we expect that will work without any challenges? Because we are seeing the Central Reserves has some challenges and governments are skeptical about it. Which one do you think will work?
Yeah, that was directed to Dr. Lopez, right? Thank you.
Well, actually, I don't think we should discard the reserves. Remember that for the central banks, in order to mobilize the reserves in a different way, in order to invest, let's say, in Africa financial vehicles or Africa-centered investment financial vehicles. This is not an easy task. They have to convince some institutions, international institutions that classify reserves. They have to convince credit rating agencies. So this is a debate that is not that simple. So I interpret the cautiousness of the central bank governors not as negativity. They didn't say they wouldn't do it. They're saying they need to go step by step about it. And I accept this is a very challenging issue, but I don't think we should discard it at all. After all, we have started the discussion about better use of reserves only about a year and a half ago. And this is quite a radical transformation of the way central bank reserves use their money. So we need to give a bit of time, and we will continue to persevere technically to make the case that it is possible. We believe it is possible, and we have been using the example of countries like China that 30 years ago, when they started their takeoff, had full control of their savings, and that Africans don't seem to be in the same situation, despite the fact that they have quite significant savings. So we have to keep making the case and do the technical studies that will allow us to go in that direction.
Yes, you had a question.
Oui, j'ai une question. Merci. Et je m'appelle André Gakwa-Hebdo. Et il existe un mécanisme traditionnel de revue, de monitoring, de suivi, de revue par les pairs. Et pour cet agenda 2063, avez-vous un autre mécanisme de suivi, de contrôle, et pour voir si réellement au niveau des pays, les choses se font de façon transparente et les progrès, et si les progrès sont réels? Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I think the point you're raising is very important. We have instituted a study to look at the capacity needed by national, regional, and continental levels on how to implement Agenda 2063, how to monitor and evaluate, and of course, because we realized right from the onset that if we don't build those skills right at the beginning, we will not be able to implement, we will not be able to monitor, we will not be able to evaluate. So as soon as that study is done, we will start working on those capacities, building them as identified.
Thank you. Yes.
Mine is just more of a food for thought and also partly a question. My name is Olawale Amzat from the Nigerian Television Authority. First, I want to commend the organization of this conference. It's been quite worthwhile. For those of us who are journalists who have participated in all the side events, we have been richly, let me say, acquainted with information on the Agenda 2063. Now, the food for thought. Agenda 2063 is a 50-year plan for Africa. And taking a look at all the people on the eye table, by 2063, I'm sure Mr. Carlos Lopez and Madam Chairperson will be our statesmen and stateswomen in Africa. Where are the youths in this conference? The future of Africa belongs to the youth. I would have expected that in all the side events, or probably in one of the side events, we should have a section for the youth who probably will take ownership of the future of Africa. If they are not part of this discussion at the onset, there might be a disarray in the vision and plan of Agenda 2063. I went around to check all the side events, no youth delegation, no youth representation. I think that is a big gap
in the whole vision and plan of Agenda 2063. The youth should be part and parcel of this initial plan from the onset. We should be able to groom leadership from the onset in Africa. One of our problems is grooming leadership. Where is the grooming at this stage of the planning? The whole of this conference hall for the last 2-3 days have been occupied by ministers, high-profile personalities who in the next 15-20 years would have excused the stage. Agenda 2063 belongs to the youth who will take over the stage. I didn't see them in this conference. So I think food for thought for the AU and the ECA. In the coming years and the coming months, I think the youth of Africa should be part of this discussion. They should be part of the side event. I think that's the side, the food for thought I want to put here. And also a question to the AU chairperson and Mr. Carlos Lopez. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a small correction. Both Dr. Lopez and Dr. Zuma are already statesmen, African statesmen.
Well, I think what the point you're making is very correct. The youth are the ones who are going to drive. If you read Agenda 2063, that's what it says. The youth and the women are going to be the big drivers for Agenda 2063. And even in its formulation, the youth groups were very much involved. So it is a plan that belongs to the youth. And I think, I don't know what Carlos is going to say, but I think it was an era of omission that we didn't have youth delegations. But let me also say that in 2013, in this ECA, when we were celebrating 50 years, we had a huge youth delegation that interacted with some of the heads of state and former heads of state, precisely because we recognized what you are saying. In 2014, we had a huge conference of the youth prior to the summit, and they gave the results of their discussions to the summit, and there was a side event where they also interacted with the heads of state. This year, in October, around that, they will be going to the Pan-African Parliament, a huge youth delegation, and they will be interacting with the parliamentarians of the continent. So what I'm saying is that the youth are not forgotten. It may have been that at this particular meeting, we did not have enough youth, and point taken, but generally, youth is very much part of Agenda 2063. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Emmanuel K. Dugbevi. I work for Ghana Business News. My question is, we are dealing with governments, but each country has opposition parties. Apart from holding government to account in terms of fulfilling their mandate, there are also governments in waiting. Does Agenda 2063 take care of the opposition systems in our countries? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, you are very correct, because Africa is now a multi-party democracy, and so the opposition is very important. In the formulation of Agenda 2063, many people were involved. But what we asked our member states was to take it back for consultation and discussions in their countries. I know some of them did extensive consultations. I know Namibia didn't just consult with political parties, but they went to every district and councillors and everyone. But I know many countries also who took it to their parliaments, where all the parties are there, and they debated it in those multi-party. And I'm hoping that those who haven't done will still do it, because also, if it's going to be part of the domestic agenda, it's important that there is a kind of national consensus around it. So some countries have already done it, and I'm hoping that those who haven't done it will still do it. Thank you.
Just two more questions. Yes, right at the end there, the lady at the back.
Thank you. I'm Gold Bana. I work for the East African. I would like to follow up on my colleague's question regarding the central bank commitment. I'm wondering whether you've had any discussions with institutions like the IMF, because once you start talking about reserves, the IMF has to get involved. And by that I mean, if you look at the requirements for these countries, usually reserves, 3 months and 3 months of reserves, for instance. One, how much money do you think is out there? Two, what sort of discussions have you had with institutions like the IMF? And the next question is to the AU chairperson. What makes Agenda 2063 different? As we know, there are so many unimplemented resolutions on the continent. What are the binding commitments that will make Agenda 2063 effective? Thank you.
Yes, okay. There's somebody hiding behind it. Yes, please, your question.
Yes, my name is Diana Lordin-Forsen from Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, Ghana. Yes, I would like to know, in the quest to finance Agenda 2063 domestically, what are the critical efforts that you are all making in order to ensure that financial illicit from Africa is solved across the whole of the continent?
Thank you for the question on the reserves. First, the amounts that we are talking about are between $400 and $500 billion. So it's quite significant. Second, we are not saying that the reserves should be used for public spending. They should keep the normal policy of having reserves. The issue is more, where do you put this money in terms of your investment? So you can do it in different ways, and right now, most of central banks in Africa buy US Treasury bills, Euro bonds, and use AAA rated financial vehicles that do not invest in Africa. So that is the issue, really. Because if we were to invest just part of this money into, let's say, the African Development Bank bonds, it will yield about 6%, and it will allow, at the same time, the African Development Bank to use it for infrastructure. So this is an example of what difference it makes where you put the money. If all this money was put in financial vehicles that invest in Africa, not only the reserves will be kept by the central banks, but they will be using that money indirectly for the development of the continent. And right now, this is not what is happening, with very, very small percentage that is being used for financial vehicles investing in Africa. Very, very small, less than 5%, I think. Now, the issue of the IMF, you saw that the central bank governors are meeting in a timeline that allows them to go to the spring meetings of the Bretton Woods institutions with a common position on some of these issues. And that is on purpose. That will allow for them to defend these positions in Bretton Woods, not only with the IMF, but all the different institutions that are present there. And I think that is quite an important evolution. Third, it's also very important to notice that this time, the Conference of Ministers of Finance and all this conference had the presence of the IMF Africa Director. This is new. So it's a sign that there is listening, interest on what is happening in the continent. Thank you.
On the question of what makes Agenda 2063 different, because you say there are lots of decisions that have not been implemented, which is true. I'll point to a few things. One, that it is an African agenda, not a intergovernmental agenda. It's an agenda for all Africans. That's what is different. And that the ideas that are in Agenda 2063 came from the citizens of the continent. We hope that in its implementation, again, the citizens will focus on that. Secondly, the other plans, we didn't work on the capacity, on the skills that we need for implementation. And with Agenda 2063, we, as I said, at this point in time, there's a study going on to look at the different capacities that we need for its implementation and its monitoring. The third difference is that we did the other plans, but expected other people to fund the plan. We did not do the plans and say, how are we going to fund it? If you look at the previous plans, including the latest NEPAD, the plan was there, but we trooped from capital to capital of the G8 looking for money, which never really came. But with Agenda 2063, we are saying the mainstay of its implementation should be our own resources, and then attract investments from outside and also partners from outside, but we must start with our own. It's like if you have a house that is burning and you stand at the gate and you say, come and help me, and you're not doing anything yourself, who's going to come running? But if they see you that you are running with buckets and trying to douse the fire, they'll come running to help you. So we are saying, and that's why all these discussions about resource mobilization and all those things about skills, about monitoring, because we've learned from our past mistakes and we are trying to improve on those. So I think that's, and we're working not only just the AU, but we're working with all the African institutions. So I think, and we're working also very closely with the RECs, the regional economic communities. So this plan is not just a plan that's sitting at the top, it's a plan that has regional aspects and national aspects. So those are some of the differences with the plans. And also, right from the onset, we are beginning to identify concrete things that need to be done in the first 10 years. Like what I said at the opening, that for instance, we want in the first 10 years for rural women and for women generally who work in agriculture to introduce technology. And we're starting that campaign very seriously to also give them access to land and access to financing. So it's a plan, but we are already teasing out the concrete things that we need to start with. And there are many that I can mention. I'm just mentioning one for now. Thank you.
Maybe just a word on the financial flows, illicit financial flows, to say that the study that has been led by former President Mbeki and the report that you have seen issued has been endorsed by the African heads of state in January in the summit, in the AU summit. Now we have to move into implementation of some of the recommendations. And a lot of recommendations can be tackled at the national level with legislation, but the most important ones have to be at the global level. And they are not Africa specific. Africa suffers from the lack of action at the global level. So it has to be part of the discussion about financing for development. Africans want this issue to be very much at the center of the discussions about financing for development, because according to the estimates that have been done, and it's the fruit of very dense research, at least between $50 and $60 billion are lost. And that means more than development aid. So that's why it is important to discuss it as part of the Financing for Development conference that will take place here in July, and eventually will send its recommendations through this common African position on financing for development that has been adopted here.
We also need to develop capacity, because some of the resources are lost, because we have no way, when companies say this is what I've spent in developing this mine, we have no way of evaluating that. And when they say I've lifted so many tons, we have no way of evaluating that indeed they've lifted those number of tons. They may have lifted 100 tons and they tell you they lifted 20, and you then accept. So I think capacity, again, is an important component to everything else that has been said. Thank you.
And on that note, we come to the end of the press briefing. Allow me to thank the Madam Chairperson of the African Union Commission and the Executive Secretary for finding time to explain the issues that have brought everybody here together. In case you need more information, please contact the communication section of AUC and public information section of the Economic Commission for Africa. Thank you very much.